Welcome to this Health Suppliers segment here on Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Glad that you could join us. Our guest in studio today is Mr. Dan O'Connor. He's President, Director, and Chief Executive Officer at OncoSec Immunotherapies. And I'll let Dan tell us a little bit about himself and OncoSec. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dan.
Good morning, Neil, and thanks for having me on the show. Hope you're well today, and thanks for that introduction. In a nutshell, OncoSec is a cancer immunotherapy company, which means that we're developing products to interact with the patient, a cancer patient's immune system, so that the immune system itself can fight back the cancer. So it's kind of trying to re-engage the body's own natural defense against cancer. And that's what, the field of immunotherapies are.
So basically taking a patient's own immune system and turning it against the cancer, is this something that once that happens, is that perpetual throughout the patient's life, or does therapy need to be ongoing in order to maintain that high level of immunity?
Yeah, so the goal is, to basically cure the patient. That's always the goal, in treating patients. But the immune system is complex. And, there's, lots of things that are going on in the patient to cause that immune system to basically not be fighting back the cancer anymore. So, if you think about it, we're born with an immune system that, fights off all sorts of things, including cancer and cell mutations. And unfortunately, in a cancer patient's life, that sometimes doesn't work the way it should. And, our traditional approaches to cancer treatments have been, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, which is chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. And, within the past, I'd say really in the past decade, maybe decade and a half, cancer immunotherapies have made great strides. And two drugs in particular have become, on the forefront of cancer immunotherapies. One is developed by BMS and the other is marketed by Merck. Your listeners probably see commercials on TV for both of the drugs. One is called Keytruda and the other is Opdivo. Yeah. And they're approved you've probably seen that too. So they're approved in lots of different solid tumors, meaning not, liquid tumors or, tumors of the blood. Instead, tumors that form an organ. So those are called solid tumors. And they're known as a kind of a group of drugs called checkpoint inhibitors. Our drug that we're developing, works on its own. We've shown, we've shown in clinical trials results that support the efficacy of the drug as well as the safety of the drug. We have to continue those clinical trials to really demonstrate that definitively. But we've taken an approach of combining our drug with the checkpoint, and in particular, checkpoint Keytruda.
Well, I was wondering what types of cancers is OncoSec. You mentioned cancer. It's a very large field. Are you specifically doing research and combining your drug with Merck's drug for a number of cancers or some specific cancers?
We are, Neil, actually. We've tested our drug in multiple different types of solid tumors. Those include Merkel cell, subcutaneous T-cell lymphoma, head and neck cancer. But today we have programs going on in combination with two specific cancers. One is skin cancer, which is known as melanoma, and the other is a form of breast cancer known as triple negative breast cancer, which is unfortunately a very difficult type or subtype of cancer, of breast cancer to treat.
Is it as difficult as melanoma, or is melanoma kind of the easy end of the spectrum and TNBC the opposite end?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So melanoma, in terms of being a type of cancer, a solid tumor cancer is relatively receptive to an immunotherapy. So, approaching that particular type of cancer with an immunotherapeutic approach, specifically using the body's own immune system to attack the cancer, has been successful. And both the Merck drug and the BMS drug, Keytruda and Opdivo, are approved in melanoma, as well as others that are deemed immunotherapies. So, and that's because I think the cancer researchers realized that melanoma itself was a relatively immunotherapeutically oriented cancer, but that's not the case with triple negative breast cancer. One way that cancer researchers describe it is in melanoma, the tumors are considered to be relatively hot. Mm-hmm. And in triple negative breast cancer, even though the gene's kind of relatively hot in melanoma, there's still cancer patients in melanoma that have cold tumors. And I can describe what that means in a second. But within triple negative breast cancer, the cancer is, considered to be not immunogenic and relatively cold.
Explaining a hot and cold cancer cell, I guess cold would be lending itself not readily to this type of therapy, and hot being the opposite.
You said it pretty well, Neil, actually. Maybe I'll just take a step back. So these two drugs, checkpoints, Opdivo and Keytruda, they've been approved in multiple different types of solid tumors. And just as a kind of a general rule, they work in about 30% of the patients in those particular types of cancers. So, for example, in melanoma, the checkpoint inhibitors work in about 35% of the patients who get it. So Keytruda and Opdivo work in that 35 or so percent of patients that receive the drug. But the other 65% don't get a benefit from the drug. And so, in cancer research, 35% response is tremendous. It's terrific. Especially when you consider the alternatives, right? So using your body's own immune system, versus something else. But the other part of the group of patients, the majority don't. And that's the 65% plus or minus. And, researchers, we all appreciate and, embrace the 30%, 35% because that's a tremendous advancement. Again, if you can, 35% of the patients getting the use of their own immune response to fight back the cancer, that's terrific. And especially when you consider what the alternatives might be. But 65% not getting a benefit is a challenge. And so researchers, clinicians have asked the question, are now asking the question very firmly, what is it about that other 65%, not only in melanoma, but other tumors where, they get the checkpoint but don't get the benefit? And the first question is why? So what is it about that group? What can we tell generally speaking? And the answer that's kind of at the top of the list, and I'll say there's more than one answer to that question, but the one that's at the top of the list, and it's kind of a generalization, is that their tumors are immunologically cold. So the majority of patients have, hot, quote unquote, receptive tumors that are hot. The minority, that's at the 35%, so they get the drug and it works for them. The other, majority that get the drug, it doesn't work. The answer's been just because the tumors are cold. And that's where our drug comes in, because we believe you've got the ability to change that cold tumor into a hot tumor, and that you get the checkpoint again after you get our drug, and you can get a benefit or get a response.
What about recurrence? If the cells recur, will they be cold and then have to be turned into hot tumors, or will they recur as a hot tumor and lend themselves again to further therapy?
Yeah. So I think generally speaking, when a patient has an immunologically cold tumor, it's pretty unlikely that they're going to get a benefit from a checkpoint therapy. And we did a study on that earlier, going back about 2 years ago, where we took patients with cold tumors in melanoma. And, the premise was that if they got the checkpoint therapy, maybe 5% or maybe 10%, somewhere in that range, would see a response to the checkpoint on its own. And so we took those patients, those cold tumor patients, gave them our drug we call Tavo, which is a cytokine. We basically put a cytokine back into the tumor and around the tumor. And the way to think about cytokines is that they signal the body's immune system. So this particular cytokine is called IL-12, and it's known as a pro-inflammatory cytokine. So it's signaling the body to inflame. And, if you can imagine if you've got a cold tumor, it's lacking that inflammation, and putting IL-12 back on the scene can help prevent or promote that pro-inflammatory response. And then you get the checkpoint such that you can get a response to the checkpoint where you might not have had your tumor had been cold to start and got the checkpoint. So, and your point about recurrence is the right one. The cancer treatments in the initial phases are pretty effective still. There's a lot that that is done effectively in what's called the primary care setting. So when you first diagnose and treat the patient, the problem is recurrence. And, when cancer patients fighting cancer, they're thinking, just beat it at the moment, which is absolutely, it's the right way to look at it. And, everybody knows it's an awful disease. But after that initial, beating it happens, the next question is, hoping that it doesn't come back. And that's the recurrence piece. So when that happens, you get into subsequent lines of treatment, and there's drugs that are in those lines, in those settings, that have demonstrated, the safety efficacy profile that's required for their approval. But unfortunately, it happens that a patient goes through all of those, available therapies and gets to the point where nothing's really working for them. And that's, what we're trying to treat in melanoma. Patients that have exhausted everything that's available to them, giving them our cytokine, again, IL-12, inflaming that tumor, and then giving them the checkpoint again. In fact, Merck's checkpoint, which is known as Keytruda, with the goal and the hope that we can shrink that patient's tumor. They previously got the checkpoint, and it didn't work for them. And so now we're trying to give them, and they've exhausted everything that's available for themselves or that their clinicians could offer them. We're trying to get that tumor in that hot zone by giving them IL-12 and then the checkpoint again.
Well, in wrapping up, where can we go online and learn some more about OncoSec and about some of these therapies that you're developing?
Sure. So our website is a pretty rich source of information about our technology, and that's OncoSec.com. That's OncoSec.com. And, we have a publication section there that provides links to publications that are relevant to our technology.
Company President and CEO of OncoSec Immunotherapies, Mr. Dan O'Connor, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Neil, thanks so much for your time, and have a great day.
You do the same. You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au.
Thank you for listening to Health Professional Radio. We're very proud to be an independent broadcaster providing our content free of charge to you, the listener. One of the ways that we're able to remain free and independent is by having people like you become patrons. You can support Health Professional Radio simply by visiting hpr.fm and clicking the button that says Become a Patron. Your patronage of even just $1 a month lets us know that you're there, which in turn makes us more valuable to advertisers. And, of course, if you're able to afford more, then we would certainly appreciate the support. My name is Toby Longhurst from Health Professional Radio. Please visit hpr.fm, click the Become a Patron button, and support us if you can.